is Manifest Destiny? It's not written up there.
The idea that we can have land from coast to coast or something.
Murder. The West.
And this is where not only is it's our God-given right that we own the land from coast to coast. Okay, is there an excuse? And you'll see this picture a lot of times. It was actually used on the AP exam a few years ago when they had, it was one of the documents in the DBQ. And yes, you'll have pictures on that. Which you see the idea, and this is where you kind of see like an angel going across the land, and you see the people moving west there. But what the idea that we have with Manifest Destiny is, and it's for America, it's our God-given right. Our God put us here in America. Here's where the question comes in. I have an Arctics to tropics too. I mean, should I say Americas? I mean, is it just North America? I mean, we're not going to worry about the Canadians and Mexicans, are we? What about South America?
You've already tried invading Canada twice. How did that work out?
Don't remind us of that. The Canadians beat us.
We'll try a third time. This third time is fun.
Okay. All right, we'll plan that out in the near future.
We could nuke them.
But this is where some of the idea that we should be stretching then maybe in other areas. Now, part of this idea here, remember some of our writing and all that we went on early 1800s, but the idea of an American race. We're not British. We are different. And some of the things that we'll have with our pioneer spirit there, that we'll have. All right, this is going to be one of our historians. There's a couple historians that we have had. We had Alexei de Tocqueville before. Here's another historian that we had. And what is called Turner's Frontier Thesis. So if you ever see Frontier Thesis or you see Turner's Thesis, it is written by a historian by the name of Frederick Jackson Turner. And he wrote in the late 1800s, he said, America is great because we can always expand.
Well, not anymore.
And actually that will become a question once we get out and settle most of what we have from coast to coast. And then what are we going to do in the late 1800s, early 1900s? And the ocean, and that's what we start doing when we become imperialistic. We start looking at the Philippines. We look at Puerto Rico. And that actually, this is where you see where he's already feeding into some other things. What happens in other parts of the world? Where else can we keep expanding?
Europe.
Space. Okay, and this is where you kind of take it when we get, can we expand beyond? We still have that idea. Where in this last election, okay, Newt Gingrich, when he's running for president, and tells about us putting a colony on the moon and possibly a colony on Mars. All right, which I mean, he was ridiculed for it, but still, I mean, it's part of what we think of. Well, could we expand? All right, and keep going in there. And actually for America, where we keep growing and getting richer, part of our expansion is actually the expansion of our economy. It's now no longer thinking just land. Now, why do people want to move out west?
Gold farming.
Farming, so what do they need?
Land.
Land. And the land's cheap. Why is it so cheap?
Because it's crappy.
You're calling Kansas, our breadbasket of America, crappy land?
Oh, because it was from the Indians.
Yeah.
Nobody else lived out
Yeah,
there.
nobody's there. I mean, it's just Indians, but did they count?
No.
Not in the eyes of the U.S. at that time. All right, well, if they're on some good land, we'll just work out a deal with them, right?
With guns.
Yes. Well, yeah. I mean, it's a deal that we might trade them. We might trade them some beads or something like that for the land, and we tell them, you move beyond that river or we shoot you. Okay, and when they get upset, we then help them out in their decision and send in the 7th Cavalry or another group of soldiers. All right, so we do have problems. What are our problems historically when we moved out west of the Indians? But we now have some new problems. Well, Spain's no longer involved. Not really France anymore. Yeah, we have Russia. Actually, Russia gets involved in this. Mexico. Russia owned where you said Alaska. Russia was the owner of Alaska. We have this country of Mexico that's broken away from Spain. Okay? We still have Britain and the area that they own of Canada. And here's where if you look at on the map where I say what is in the way of Manifest Destiny. We take this time period before the Mexican War. after we had the Louisiana Purchase, the area to the north of us, even though this part says USA or United States, Canada, is owned by Britain. Okay, we have Mexico in this area. Texas broke away, which we'll get to that in a later section, and then what that has. But for a while, that was part of it. There. The area of Oregon, really didn't know who owned that. We didn't know if we got that with the Louisiana Purchase. We said we did, but Mexico said that they owned it. Britain said they owned it with Canada, and Russia said that they owned it because they owned Alaska. So we're not really sure if 4 different countries are all claiming that they own that land. And again, the Native Americans that have been there for 10, 15,000 years, well, they have a little bit of a claim to it there, but we kind of ignore them, as well as everyone else is ignoring their claims to it. All right, here's kind of a review of where we came along the way. In the beginning, we get the land that we have for the 13 colonies, but at the end of the war, we get some land with the Treaty of Paris 1783. What chunk of land did we get with the Treaty of Paris 1783? Yeah, the Ohio River Valley. Basically, you take from the mountains to the Mississippi River, we get a huge chunk of land. And you might remember this is where what seemed like 2 little battles that George Roger Clark won, but that gave us a claim. And Britain gives us that land, so France doesn't get it. So we get the Appalachian Mountains to the Mississippi River, get the Ohio River Valley, that actually also including the Tennessee River Valley, if you want to put it with that also. Don't forget the southern part of that. Remember that Louisiana Purchase? What did that give us?
Louisiana.
Yeah, Louisiana, which doubled the size that we had. And kind of a little review for you there. We get $15 million. We get it from France. The Adams-Onis Treaty. What did that give us?
Florida.
Yes, Florida. Anybody remember how much we paid?
A lot more than.
Yeah, 5.3, but basically, let's say 5 million.
A lot more than.
Isn't how much we paid for it from the beginning?
No, I mean, that's trivial.
Okay.
But this is where kind of sometimes, but some people remember things dollars. But you kind of look and see. I mean, we realistically, I mean, and for a land deal, even 5 million is a pretty good buy. It doesn't seem as good as when you compare it to Louisiana Purchase, because at that time, was Florida really worth a whole lot? Mickey hadn't moved here yet. Okay, I mean, we had bad farming, so. And I have a question: how did the Europe's conflicts benefit the young United States?
Got money for land that they
Got
didn't
away
care
from us.
about.
Well, we pay them money from the land, like Louisiana Purchase.
They wanted to align with us. If they needed help, they wanted to be able to call us.
Right, the aligning that we have in the different wars. You think about it, as a young country, we got lucky. Britain and France fighting each other make it where instead of us being these just the 13 states, we actually get all the land that is in here. Even the problems that you have, that comes down to even with Florida. All right, traces back to these after the Napoleonic Wars and where it made Spain so weak. And for them to sell them when they were losing others. So basically, all the problems Europe had made it where we gained all that land. And did we really do a whole lot of fighting for it? In the Revolutionary War, we did some fighting, but most of it, we got it pretty cheap. Now, the idea of sectionalism. As different areas, when we were expanding, they had different ideas of why they wanted to. Why would the South want to move west? Okay, more slave states. Okay, they were wanting slaves. Why did they want more slave states? Did they really like the idea of slavery? That they would just want more slaves?
Also, they just want so that they can still count their votes for slaves.
And this is where it comes into the politics. They need more states for power in the House of Representatives and especially in the Senate. Because you remember the Missouri Compromise. All right, you need to have slave states come in, so it cannot be ever outlawed.
Yeah, but isn't there like a law that says for every slave state that had to be one?
Well, that's the Missouri Compromise, where we're kind of keeping it even, but that's what they want. It wasn't an actual law. Is kind of what was going on. But if we didn't expand out west, would we be able to get any more slave states?
Right.
So that's where this happened. Why would people in the East, if you were in New York, Boston, in that area, why do you want to?
The market economy.
Okay, the market economy, basically, they want to sell their stuff to those farmers. The factories that are emerging out west, it's you have people to buy your stuff that you're making. Now, if you're already out west, why do you want to keep moving even further west? Or why do you want to have more land for that? The idea of more land, you always want to be able to expand. And here's where we get to some of the things that aren't as concrete. I mean, I have land on there, but the frontier spirit. Remember that thing for the American race? What makes us different than some of the other countries as Americans?
Nationalism.
The idea
We're
is
violent.
equal. We are more violent. Are our frontiers been a little violent? Okay, I mean, this is part of this idea that we have.
Did they like seriously believe that they were completely different from British just from being there?
No, it's kind of like, basically we look at things and they're our cousins. Are you like your cousins? Do you have some similarities? No.
No.
Usually there's some things that you might have, because a lot of times with your cousins, there are some things, but there are things that you are different. All right, you have, and that's what we kind of looked at it. We're like Britain, but we're not like Britain. And sometimes instead of a frontier spirit, the pioneer spirit. And this is another word kind of get used to seeing. Rugged individualism. Anyone ever heard of the idea, pull yourself up by your bootstraps?
Yes.
What does that mean?
Move on.
Yeah, be tough. You're wearing boots, you get knocked down, okay, you're gonna pull yourself up. All right, are we gonna ask for some help from someone? And it's kind of the idea for America. If you were out west, and you decided to start a farm, and you moved out west, are you gonna get much help from many people? You're on your own. And that's kind of the spirit that we had for a lot of the Americans. All right, last part that we'll do today here. All right, where can we go and what's the problem? We were actually looking at Cuba. What's the problem where, and no, that's not coast to coast. We're looking beyond the coast. What's the problem where we want Cuba? Who owns it? Castro's not there. What? Not Britain. Who owns Cuba back in the 1800s? Spain. Do they want to give it to us?
No.
Do they want to sell it to us? No, they don't want to sell it to us either. It's a valuable possession. So Spain owns it. What's wrong with us when we were looking at Texas and we say we want that? Mexico owns it. And we'll get to the Mexican side later on. California. What's the problem with California and all that area in the southwest?
So in Russia.
It's still Mexico. Mexico now. This is their own country. And Oregon. What's wrong with Oregon?
Russia.
Yeah, basically we have Mexico, Russia, U.S., Britain. We all claim it. Who's living there? Yeah, the Indians. Right. Yeah, the people that are living there, they are. All right. Mexico doesn't really have many people living there. Russia doesn't have many people living there. The United States and Britain, we don't really have many people living there. We're starting to send some there, but that's where. Yeah. All right, we'll go ahead and stop right there. Go ahead and put away your notes. Now, it begins in Independence, Missouri. You'll notice the Oregon Trail begins in Independence, Missouri. Anyone know what major city is close to Independence, Missouri? Yeah, St. Louis. Which this is where for the arch was actually made and is part of basically the beginning for going into our frontier. Does this thing work? But we take Santa Fe Trail, and it was going into to the city of Santa Fe, which actually wasn't much of a city. It was a town, but it was a trading post for all this area in the mountains. Indians would go to that, fur traders would go there, and basically people would come into it. But it was easier for it to get from the United States than up from Mexico City to go there. So Americans were trading in that area. And the whole scheme of things is not really real important, except for the fact that we're going into that area. When we see this area, and it's owned by Mexico, do we think that the Mexicans should own it? No. It should be us. If we're the ones selling the stuff there, shouldn't we own it? And so this is part of that. We'll go with that manifest destiny that we want to go there. The Oregon Trail, and this is where you kind of go back to the 5th grade, and some of you may have played that Oregon Trail game. All right, that one actually, even a long time ago, and there's different versions. I know they got a pretty good version now with it. If you played the old version, some of you skipped them straight to the part that you could kill the animals. Okay, I think
It's
you
like
put
that
some
happens
things.
here, actually, with games.
But a lot of the elementary schools, they had the Oregon Trail game that you go and you would plan out. I have on there, what were some of the dangers faced on the trail? If you played that game, you might remember. As you left Independence, Missouri, and you had to cross all the way to Oregon, what was a danger that you could have?
Native Americans?
Yeah, there are some Indians that didn't like the idea of you going across their property, which is why you traveled in wagon trains, because safety in numbers. At night, you would put you would circle the wagons. So if they were to attack you at night, you would use the wagons kind of as a little bit of a fortification there. So, you got Native American. What other dangers would you have? All right, animals. What would happen if a whole bunch of buffalo were in a stampede?
You get run over.
Yeah, you get run over. So, I mean, this is where, and, I mean, things, rattlesnakes, other things that you have. So you have problems. What's another danger you're facing?
Weather.
All right, weather. Here's the tricky thing. It's going to take on these wagons, and for the most part, you're going to walk this. Most people didn't have the money to ride a horse. And you wanted your wagon to be as light as possible, because whatever beast of burden you had to haul. You might have horses, but it was better to have oxen. Why was an ox better to have, a pair of oxen better than to have what would be probably like 6 horses? They have more stamina.
Powerful.
They're very powerful.
They can always take one more way.
Stubborn.
What did you say?
Stubborn.
Well, they are stubborn, but you just whip an ox. I mean, that's,
They eat less.
all right. Well, they don't eat less, but what do they eat?
Grass.
They eat grass. Any of you that have horses, well, they eat more than hay. You got to give them grain. And the more work that the horse does, the more grain you have to give them, the less grass. Meanwhile, an ox, that is just basically a castrated bull, they can live off of more of the grass. So it's a lot easier. You don't have to haul it. Which, if you have horses, that means your wagon, you got to have more bags of food to feed your horses and less of your own stuff. And when you move, do you want your stuff? So that's why the oxen were good, but they're slower. All right, what is another? Well, going back with weather though, it takes 4 or 5 months to cross over here, but you got to leave early enough that before you don't get stuck in the mountains. But you don't want to leave too early, because if you have the rivers flooding, you can get caught in a flooded river, because you have to cross some rivers along the way. Or you might just be sitting on the side of the river for a while. So the question is, do you leave too early or too late? Sometimes if you leave too early, you're going to get caught by a late season blizzard, which is not a fun thing to probably be basically living in a tent on. Yeah.
I don't know if it was the Oregon Trail, but wasn't there a trail where everyone got snowed in and they had to start eating people?
And what happened, this is where it was off the California Trail. You take the Oregon Trail and then you cut down, and the Donner Party is what you're referring to. So you'll see different jokes about the Donner Party, and when we see some of the stuff from American Story of Us, they kind of go back to a couple of things with that. But yeah, there was a group that got caught, and the bad thing is with them, they were, I don't remember how much, but basically less than 100 miles from where they needed to go. And this is where groups were coming in and rescuing. They could only get a small group at a time, and ultimately when they got to the last group, all right, you couldn't tell what happened to the other person, but there were pieces of the body around. Okay, but yeah, cannibalism, and that's what the Donner Party is famous for. But you have a lot of dangers that you have on the trail. It was not an easy thing to do. And this is where for women, they're walking most of us. And one of the statistics that is given in American Story of Us is the fact that 1 out of every 3 women while they're walking that trail are pregnant.
What?
Okay, because we did not have birth control. Okay, Are you going to stop and not, if you're a pregnant woman and you need to leave in the spring, is your husband and family going to wait a couple months? No, you go. I mean, that's part of life. All right? And you just continue going. Now, the reason for going to Oregon. Starts out, we have our fur trader. Remember John Jacob Astor? He would start the town of Astoria in Oregon, and it would be a trading post for fur. A lot of fur traders got there. They're telling about it. Then we're going to have two missionaries, Marcus and Narcissa Whitman. And those of you that are involved with churches usually sponsor missionaries. And then the missionaries come back and tell about what they are doing. Well, they didn't come back to the churches, but they wrote letters. Now, these letters, it might take a year or two before the letter gets back to the church. And when they wrote of it, they told about Oregon. Now, the area they're going to is the Willamette Valley, which is where Portland is today. What is Oregon famous for?
Snow.
Well, not snow, but rain. It's a rainforest, but it's not what most of you think of. It's, even though it's higher up in latitudes, it's not something that has really harsh winters. It has a lot of things with rain. What type of trees are famous in Oregon? Yeah, the redwoods. A lot of rain, big trees. How do you think the soil is in Oregon?
Very good.
And what do most people do for a living? They farm. So if you get letters from this missionary telling you about the winters aren't that bad. We got these giant trees all over. And the soil, as far as you can dig down, is good, black soil. Great for growing stuff. And then they wrote about the Indians. The Indians are really nice. They get along, they're friendly. And then we have in the rivers, you have these giant fish swim upstream, and they're good to eat and easy to catch. Sounds like a pretty good place to go, isn't it? What's ironic about it? Anyone know what ended up happening to the Whitmans?
They died.
They were killed by Indians. But, alright, but that's where they were later on. Some of those friendly Indian tribes later on weren't quite so friendly. Alright, with Oregon, we would have what is called joint occupation. Both us and Britain, would jointly settle it. Notice I have on here Russia and Mexico. They both claim Oregon also. Do we even care what they want? No. We would then get, and this is where the manifest destiny comes in. We had a slogan of 54-40 or fight. Now, this line right here is the 49th parallel. 54-40 would be up about here. It would be up in what is British Columbia. So what a lot of people were saying at that time is, that was what Oregon was. See, we have Oregon, Washington, British Columbia was all of what we called Oregon at that time. And there were a lot of Americans that said, we need all of Oregon. None of this sharing it with Britain. And that's where people said it. This is where manifest destiny. It's all of it belongs to us. Well, ultimately, we would decide, well, most of the Americans are living down in this area. Most of the British are living up in that area. Well, let's just basically have the 49th parallel continue on and make that the boundary for each other. Do we need to fight Britain in the war for this? So again, this is where we end up making a peaceful boundary. And there wasn't a problem with Britain. But that's where the 49th parallel is extended, going to Oregon. All right, other place that we want. Yeah.
What did John do after we did for settlement and the same thing with Marcus?
All right, what did Astor do? Yeah, fur trade. What did the Whitmans do? Yeah, the missionaries, they're writing about it, they're telling about it. All right, we want Cuba too. Where's Cuba? It's an island. How far from Key West?
70 miles.
90. 90 miles from Key West. So, here's Key West, 90 miles away, we have Cuba. Who owns Cuba at that time period? Spain. Spain is really weak at this time. They've been losing their South American countries. They lost Mexico. Mexico's an independent country. And so we had different groups that were looking down to say, that's really close to Florida. shouldn't we own it as Americans? Because it's also one of the most profitable islands and a lot of Southerners really wanted it. Why did the Southerners really want to have Cuba?
Slavery.
It already has slavery, and they can expand into it. And they were looking at it and saying, we can make 3 or 4 different states out of Cuba. It's a pretty big island. So they were kind of looking for that expansion. This is where, when you see the word Ostend Manifesto, or that phrase, you need to be thinking of that's when we wanted Cuba. All right, you should somehow just link that in your mind. You see that, think Cuba.
What is Puerto Rico to us?
Well, we'll get to that when we get to the Spanish-American War. You're jumping way ahead of history.
I just didn't know like if we consider Cuba now like a province.
No, Cuba's its own country. So, but at that time we were looking at it. Now we never got it, but at one time with the Ostend Manifesto, we tried to buy Cuba. We also had groups come in and try to actually we tried to have it where the Cubans would declare their independence, and they would break away, and the idea then would be that they would join the United States. And we had Southerners that were down there trying to cause a rebellion in Cuba. But that is where for Cuba, again, you gotta remember the Ostend Manifesto and think Cuba with it. Texas, we're going to get into in the next section there, because Texas, they always want to be on their own, even though we will lump them together. All right, on your note packet, you'll notice that it says Harrison. Cross that out and put Polk.
But Jimmy he wasn't alive.
So where we can't, even though Harrison is our great president, okay, and he would have really helped us expand, but in a good way. Okay, unfortunately, his plan, people didn't listen to him. Okay, they thought that just because he had pneumonia and was out of it, that his plan wasn't good enough. All right, what did the presidents do when it came to Manifest Destiny? Now, Andrew Jackson, as president, when it came to the idea of expanding with Texas, yeah, he says no. Why not? Yeah, the issue of slavery. Is Jackson a pretty smart man?
Yes.
He knows that the issue of slavery is something that he doesn't want to go. Because does Jackson ever back down to a fight? Here's a fight he did back down to, though. He's like, I'm not going to walk into that fight. Martin Van Buren, the next president. What did he do when it came to the issue of expansion and trying to get Texas into the United States? Yeah, same thing. I'm not going there. Same thing as Jackson. Harrison, again, one great month, but then we get to Tyler. Anyone know what Tyler's idea when it came to expansion was?
Didn't he want to?
Yeah, he wanted to. Except for, did anybody listen to Tyler? Yeah, that was the problem, was it? Nobody was listening to him. Officially, Tyler would be a person that we would end up expanding with, because after Polk was elected, he was actually able to get a few things through that Polk said he was going to do. He actually did it before Polk actually stepped into the office, in between the election and the inauguration. But Tyler was actually for expansion. And James K. Polk is a person that majorly is for expansion. He runs his campaign in the election of 1844 on the idea of Oregon, it belongs to us, and Texas belongs to us. And I had that question, was Jackson right? He said that if we expand into places like Texas and keep expanding out, that the issue of slavery would become a problem. Did the issue of slavery become a problem in the future decades for the United States?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Andrew Jackson knew what he was talking about with there. So to kind of fill in with that. Yeah, Tyler did support it, but remember he was the Whig that was not a Whig. And the Democrats didn't trust him either, so neither party did. He was president for almost 4 years and realistically was not doing much during that 4 years. All right, the election of 1844, guess who our Whig candidate is?
Henry Clay.
There you go.
Yeah, Henry Clay. He's still around. Oh, he doesn't win this one?
Feel bad. Smith won.
Yeah. Does he ever win?
No. And the winner. Now I have on their dark horse candidate. Most people did not know anything about James K. Polk, but he would ultimately be the person that would win. And here they choose him because there was nothing wrong with him. Everybody else, the Democrats try to choose, somebody else would say, no, I don't like him because of this. So they chose him and basically didn't have. The one thing about Polk that he would have, you see this with the electoral vote isn't very close. The popular vote, and this kind of shows with Clay. Clay is a pretty popular guy. 48% to 50%. Right, he came very close to being even with this. But the electoral vote is how you win. In the Electoral College, Polk won by a pretty big amount. Now, James K. Polk, and we'll kind of get into him a little more in the next section that we have, he came into office saying, we're going to accept Texas, Oregon is ours. He flat out, he said it there, and he said, I'm going to do this in the 4 terms, or in my 4 years, I'm only serve 1 year, and that's it. Most presidents don't say that. All right, he said, in fact, basically his idea was, if I can't get it done in 4 years, then get someone else in their office. All right, the issue, expansion with Oregon and Texas. Texas would be the big one, but don't forget about Oregon also.
Is this, why are they saying Oregon if they have the 49?
Well, this is kind of, during this, I kind of made it over that time period. It doesn't actually go always with this. There.
So
We would end up working out that deal.
Oh.
Polk was smart enough that we didn't go to war with them. So some people were young. But sometimes if you're running for office, do you use the passions of somebody for somebody to get you elected and then do a more practical? I mean, and that'll happen in this election. Okay, if Romney gets elected, some of the things that he's saying he won't do because politically it won't be smart for him to do that. All right, miscellaneous manifest destiny information. And this is kind of a throw-in of various things. This is an obscure treaty, but it's actually something for the future. If you can remember this, it's a great thing to kind of do. The Clayton-Bulwer Treaty, we make a joint deal with Britain that will build a canal across the Central America Isthmus. Did we do it in the middle of the 1800s? Anybody know why, when we kept trying in the 1800s, both us and Britain, France would try it, why they never could get it built? It wasn't water that was the problem. Something smaller. Yeah, malaria, the mosquitoes. Malaria, yellow fever. All right, you couldn't get enough workers down there to do it before they would end up all getting sick. And so we finally we would build the Panama Canal, but that would be in the early 1900s. All right, so that'd be, did we do it then? No, we didn't. Okay, we'd have to wait for Teddy Roosevelt to come in history.
Did we fill up the swamps or whatever?
Yeah, we drained a lot of the swamps so there would be less mosquitoes. We had some chemicals that we used. We learned to don't let water sit. Okay, there were a lot of practical things that we had learned by that time. All right, we had the Aroostook War before. This is the argument over the Canadian Maine border. The treaty, remember, with it is the Webster-Ashburton Treaty. Again, we had this in our last section. It's pretty cut and dry. Again, we also had the problems with the Creole and the Caroline that were settled with this. But notice here with Britain, does it sound like we're having much problems with Britain? No. I mean, yeah, we have some arguments, but are we going to go fighting over it? And that's where, after the War of 1812, California Gold Rush we'll have in the next section, because would that make people want to move out west when gold was discovered? All right, and that's the end of this section.